Have you ever experienced something strange in your life? Someone who once talked to you every day, someone who seemed curious about you, someone who looked happy whenever you appeared, suddenly begins to ignore you? At first, it feels confusing. You think maybe they are busy, maybe something happened in their life, maybe you are just imagining things. But then the silence grows longer. The replies disappear. The attention fades. And slowly a painful question starts growing inside your mind. What did I do wrong? But here is something most people never realize. When a person suddenly starts ignoring you, the truth is often far deeper than simple disinterest. According to the psychological ideas of Carl Jung, when someone withdraws from you without explanation, it usually reveals something happening inside their own unconscious mind rather than something wrong with you. Human beings are not as simple as we appear on the surface. Much of our behavior is driven by hidden emotions and unconscious conflicts that we barely understand ourselves. Jung believed that every person lives with two different layers of mind. The conscious mind is the part that makes decisions, speaks to people, and tries to appear logical and controlled. But beneath it exists the unconscious mind, a deep psychological world filled with hidden fears, desires, memories, and emotional patterns. Most people go through life unaware of how powerful this unconscious world really is. Now imagine this situation. You meet someone, and for some reason, the interaction between you feels natural. Conversations flow easily. There is curiosity. There is attention. Maybe there is even a quiet emotional connection building between the two of you. But suddenly something changes. Their behavior becomes distant. They stop responding with the same energy. Eventually, they start ignoring you completely. To most people, this looks like a simple rejection. But Jung would say that this kind of behavior often signals an internal conflict happening inside that person's psyche. Sometimes when a person meets someone who awakens strong emotions in them, those emotions can feel overwhelming. Attraction, curiosity, vulnerability, emotional intensity. These feelings can be powerful, but not everyone knows how to handle them. Some people have spent years building emotional walls around themselves to avoid getting hurt. They convince themselves that they are independent, detached, and unaffected by relationships. Then suddenly, someone appears who breaks through those walls without even trying. The connection begins to feel real. And that is exactly when fear begins to appear. Because emotional closeness requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is something many people are deeply afraid of. It means the possibility of rejection. It means the possibility of heartbreak. It means giving another person the power to affect your emotional world. For someone who is used to controlling their feelings, this can feel extremely dangerous. So the mind searches for a way to protect itself. And the easiest way is distance. Instead of facing their emotions, the person simply withdraws. This is one of the reasons why someone might suddenly begin ignoring you. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel something they do not know how to handle. Carl Jung explained this behavior through another powerful idea called the shadow. According to Jung, every human being carries parts of their personality that they hide or suppress. These hidden aspects form what Jung called the shadow self. The shadow contains emotions we consider uncomfortable or threatening to our identity. Feelings like insecurity, jealousy, longing, emotional dependence, or vulnerability. Most people spend their lives trying to hide these emotions from the world. They want to appear confident, strong, and emotionally in control. But sometimes another person unknowingly awakens these hidden emotions. Suddenly, the presence of that person makes them feel exposed. Their hidden insecurities come to the surface. Their emotional defenses begin to shake. And instead of confronting those feelings, the mind reacts with avoidance. They start ignoring the person who triggered those emotions. This is why ignoring someone can feel so confusing. One moment, the connection seems real. The next moment, the person acts as if you suddenly disappeared from their world. From the outside, it looks cold and unfair. But inside their mind, something far more complicated may be happening. Their unconscious mind may be struggling with emotions they are not ready to face. But here is where most people make the biggest mistake. When someone starts ignoring them, they immediately assume they have lost their value. They begin chasing harder. They send more messages. They try to demand explanations. They try to prove they are worth attention. And ironically, this reaction often pushes the other person even further away. Because when someone is already feeling emotionally overwhelmed, additional pressure makes the situation feel even more intense. Their instinct for distance becomes stronger. The silence becomes deeper. What most people fail to understand is that ignoring behavior often says more about the inner struggles of the other person than it does about your worth. Sometimes the silence you experience is not rejection. Sometimes it is simply a person running away from emotions they do not yet understand. And according to Carl Jung, when someone runs away from their own emotions, the story is far from over. Because the unconscious mind has a strange way of bringing unresolved feelings back again, often when the person least expects it. But the story does not end with fear or emotional avoidance. According to the psychological understanding of Carl Jung, there is another hidden reason why someone may begin ignoring you, and this reason is even more fascinating. Jung believed that every human being carries unconscious, psychological images that influence the way we experience attraction and connection. These inner images shape the kind of people who affect us deeply, even when we cannot logically explain why. Sometimes you meet someone and the interaction feels normal, simple, predictable. But other times, something unusual happens. The connection feels intense, almost magnetic. Conversations seem deeper than usual. Eye contact carries a strange emotional charge. It feels as if the other person somehow understands you without many words. Jung explained that when this happens, it often means that the other person has activated an unconscious psychological pattern inside you. In Jungian psychology, these patterns are connected to what he described as the anima and the animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies that live within the unconscious mind. These energies shape the emotional images we carry about relationships and attraction. When we encounter someone who unconsciously reflects this inner image, the emotional reaction can become extremely powerful. Suddenly, the connection feels meaningful, even if the relationship is still new. But here is where the paradox begins. Emotional intensity can be both exciting and frightening at the same time. For someone who is emotionally open and self-aware, this kind of connection can feel beautiful and inspiring. But for someone who has spent years protecting themselves from vulnerability, the same experience can feel overwhelming. Their mind begins to sense that this relationship could affect them more deeply than they expected. And with that realization comes a silent fear. What if I become attached? What if I lose emotional control? What if this person eventually rejects me or hurts me? These fears may not always be conscious thoughts. Often they exist beneath the surface of awareness, quietly influencing behavior. But the emotional tension they create can still be powerful. Instead of moving closer to the person who triggered these feelings, the mind sometimes chooses the opposite reaction. It creates distance. The person starts replying less often. Their attention slowly fades. Eventually, they may begin ignoring the other person completely. To the outside world, this behavior appears cold or confusing. But inside their mind, it may actually be an attempt to regain emotional control. Jung believed that human beings often run away from the very experiences that could lead to their psychological growth. Facing deep emotions requires courage, honesty, and self-awareness. And many people simply have not reached that level of emotional maturity yet. Instead of exploring what they feel, they retreat from it. But there is another psychological layer hidden beneath this behavior. Sometimes when a person begins to feel emotionally connected to someone, it also awakens their personal insecurities. Your presence might make them aware of aspects of themselves they would rather ignore. Perhaps they feel they are not successful enough, not confident enough, or not emotionally stable enough to maintain the connection. Your presence becomes a mirror reflecting the parts of themselves they feel uncertain about. Instead of confronting these insecurities, they choose to escape the situation completely. Ignoring becomes their way of avoiding the uncomfortable reflection. Jung often explained that relationships act like mirrors of the unconscious mind. The people who affect us the most deeply are often those who reveal something about ourselves that we have not yet understood. This is why some individuals suddenly distance themselves from someone who seemed important to them. The emotional mirror becomes too intense to face. Rather than confronting what they see, they simply step away from it. But what many people fail to realize is that ignoring someone rarely erases the emotions involved. Silence does not always mean the feelings have disappeared. In many cases, the emotions are still there, hidden beneath the surface, continuing to influence the person's thoughts and behavior in subtle ways. Jung believed that the unconscious mind does not forget unresolved emotions. Instead, those emotions remain active beneath the surface until they are eventually understood or confronted. And this leads us to one of the most surprising truths about ignoring behavior. Sometimes the person who tries to forget you by creating distance may end up thinking about you even more than before. Because the mind has a strange relationship with avoidance. The more someone tries not to think about something emotionally significant, the more that thought tends to return in unexpected moments. The silence they created may not be the end of the emotional story at all. In fact, according to Jungian psychology, silence can sometimes be the beginning of a much deeper internal conflict within the person who chose to walk away. Now here is where the situation becomes even more interesting. According to the psychological perspective of Carl Jung, when someone suddenly begins ignoring you, the silence they create often reveals an inner battle that is still continuing inside them. Most people believe that ignoring someone means the feelings are gone. They assume the connection meant nothing. But human psychology is rarely that simple. Jung believed that when emotions are suppressed instead of understood, they do not disappear. They move deeper into the unconscious mind, where they continue influencing thoughts, dreams, and behavior in subtle ways. This means the person who tried to escape their emotions by ignoring you may still be carrying those emotions inside them without fully realizing it. Their mind tried to regain control by creating distance, but the emotional energy behind the connection may still exist beneath the surface. This is why sometimes people who ignore someone suddenly reappear later in life, acting as if something unfinished still exists between them. The mind remembers emotional experiences that were never fully resolved. But there is another important lesson hidden inside this situation, and it is something most people never consider. When someone begins ignoring you, the way you respond to that silence can completely change the psychological dynamic between you and that person. Most individuals react with fear and insecurity. They chase harder. They send more messages. They try to force explanations. They become desperate for attention because they feel their value has been threatened. But ironically, this reaction often produces the opposite result. When someone is already overwhelmed by their emotions, pressure only makes them feel even more trapped. Their instinct for distance becomes stronger. The silence becomes deeper. Jung believed that emotional maturity requires a different approach. Instead of trying to control the behavior of another person, the healthiest response is to maintain your own sense of identity and emotional balance. In simple words, when someone starts ignoring you, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to lose yourself in the process. Do not beg for attention. Do not chase silence. Do not measure your value based on another person's confusion. When you remain calm and self-assured, something interesting often happens on a psychological level. The dynamic changes. The person who created distance may begin to notice that you did not react the way they expected. Instead of seeing someone desperate for validation, they see someone who respects themselves enough to walk away from emotional uncertainty. This can create curiosity inside them. They begin wondering why you did not chase them. They begin questioning the assumptions they made about you. And sometimes that curiosity becomes stronger than the distance they created. But even if they never return, something much more important has happened. You have protected your self-respect and emotional stability. Jung believed that true psychological strength comes from understanding your own inner world rather than trying to control the behavior of others. When you understand that someone ignoring you may simply reflect their own fears, insecurities, or unresolved emotions, the silence loses much of its power over you. Instead of feeling rejected, you begin seeing the situation from a deeper perspective. Human relationships are complex reflections of the unconscious mind. Sometimes two people move closer because they are ready to explore those reflections together. Other times they move apart because one of them is not yet prepared to face what the connection reveals. But your worth does not change based on another person's readiness to confront their own emotions. In the end, someone ignoring you may not be rejecting your value at all. They may simply be revealing the limits of their own emotional awareness. And once you understand that truth, the silence that once felt painful begins to look very different. It becomes not a judgment of who you are, but a glimpse into the hidden struggles of another human mind.